Mr. Pradhan, distinguished audience, members of the IDSA, and of course I see a very large friends from the media here today. Good afternoon, and it's been a opportunity for me to get this podium to speak on the Y.V. Chavan Memorial Lecture at this very prestigious institution. Mr. Pradhan did mention about somebody he had met in MNG area. I was fortunate to have been the GOC of the MNG area from 1st of December 2015 to 31st of December 2015. So I'm quite sure he's not referring to me, because there is a gap in the time capsule that he's talking about. But that person whom he is associated with happened to be my father, who was also in the same position in the years from 1983 to 84. Today, when we talk about hybrid warfare in the 21st century, well, we all know that this form of warfare is not unorganized warfare. We may in some way call it unconventional warfare or sub-conventional warfare. But let me tell you, this form of warfare is very much sequenced and organized. It is gaining momentum in these days and is becoming a new form of warfare. Therefore, this form of war fighting is all encompassing, and rather than destroying an enemy's military capability, it focuses on the population and infrastructure as being the centers of gravity. It covers the full spectrum of warfare by combining the lethality of conventional warfare with fanatical fervor of irregular warfare and untapped spectrum of technology for cyber and info warfare. It also entails creating acts of criminal disorder, law and order issues, and public disorder in the target country during peace. It embodies the age-old saying that goes on, all is fair in war. The use of the term hybrid warfare, therefore in the military lexicon, appears to be relatively new. But let me tell you, it does find reference in the Arthashastra. I wouldn't say reference, in fact, it is repeatedly comes into place in the Arthashastra. So it is nothing new to us. Though we say it was coined in 2006 during the Israel-Hezbollah conflict. That is how the US Maritime Strategy Doctrine mentioned it in 2007. But as I told you, it is nothing new to us. We are quite familiar with this form of warfare. Some also opine that the beginning of hybrid warfare was made in Afghanistan when the Taliban and the Mujahideen were employed with state patronage against the erstwhile Soviet Union. Some other associate the term in connection with action by Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, where non-state actors were pitted against far superior conventional forces. However, whilst the means by which state and non-state actors conduct hybrid war today have changed, the fundamental principle of utilizing a combination of conventional and irregular methods to achieve a political objective is consistent with older forms of conflict. Chanakya's articulation in the Arthashastra highlights the various variants of warfare. Mantra Yudh is the use of diplomacy to wage and win wars, followed by Prakasa Yudh or conventional warfare, under the laid down norms of warfare. Kut Yudh refers to concealed warfare, which is an amalgamation of treachery, deceit, and other irregular means. And finally, Tusnim Yudh, that is silent warfare, wherein war is waged without declaring it and fought by proxies in collision. In the modern context, the various components of hybrid warfare were articulated by Chanakya and Sun Tzu several thousand years ago. Closer to our age, around 2 centuries ago, the Prussian military philosopher Karl von Clausewitz had noted that war is more than a true chameleon that slightly adapts its characteristics to the given case. Similar statements have been made by other great thinkers. Indian Army operations in 1971, combined with the indigenous Mukti Bahini in erstwhile East Pakistan, were also Clausewitzian in nature, of fighting a people's war. Thus I opine that hybrid warfare has existed since the history of mankind. Over centuries, hybrid warfare, or more broadly conflicts which could not be easily justified or classified, have been known as new wars. Fourth generation warfare, unrestricted warfare, or the recent Russian articulation of the Gerasimov doctrine in 2012, which alluded to ambiguous warfare. Ancient Indian history is replete with examples of seeds of dissent being sown amongst populations by warring kings, as are tales of treachery, bribery, connivance, and subversion. In contemporary context, India has been a victim of this form of warfare since independence, about which I shall speak a little later. In the 21st century, what has changed is the phenomenal technological leapfrog, which has added greater asymmetry to hybrid warfare. Today's irregulars surprise conventional forces by use of high-tech gadgets and weapons such as rockets, surface-to-air missiles, very sophisticated communication, and the near-instant reach back to their state sponsors. Small but tech-savvy teams with intricate local knowledge and some support can thus cause big disruptions. The asymmetry has always therefore existed in hybrid warfare. Sometimes the term hybrid warfare is confused with asymmetric warfare. However, the two terms are not really the same. While asymmetric warfare can manifest from asymmetry of force, technology, methods, battle space, goals, organizations, morality, and threshold, hybrid implies employing regular and irregular means in tandem to include terrorists, criminals, counterfeit currency, economic means, assertive diplomacy, private hackers, and other non-state actors. The connection between the two terms lies in the fact that asymmetric techniques can be employed within hybrid warfare. As an example, the dropping of an atomic bomb is asymmetric but not hybrid. Like I said, the manifestations of hybrid warfare can be in multiple forms: terror attacks, diplomatic intervention, political pressure, economic sanctions, economic disruptions, intelligence operations, propaganda, and cyber attacks, all intertwined with the employment of conventional forces in the background. This includes disruptive techniques like stone throwing, mob protests, and school burnings. As is well known, hybrid operations tend to last a long time, and their prime intent is to maintain deniability. This is what we are experiencing in Kashmir today. Since the minds of the leader and the population are the centers of gravity, belligerents seek to use mental munitions along with hardware munitions. They would continue to aim to create frenzy by terror, accompanied by psychological warfare of propaganda, just remaining below the conventional threshold. Thus, technological superiority, precision weapons, and a networked approach of a conventional force are often inadequate tools to deal with this kind of warfare. It may be recounted that these days modern tools did not allow the US coalition operations to achieve swift overall and ultimate victory in the 2003 Iraq War or in Afghanistan as it had done in the 1991 Gulf campaign. The physical manifestation of this conceptual dilemma is that we are always or almost always incorrectly prepared for a conflict. To colloquially state it, is to arrive for a cricket match with a hockey stick in hand. Having seen the issue, and before addressing the ways to address this challenge of hybrid warfare in the 21st century, I would like to delve a little deeper into what it takes for this form of warfare to succeed. That is so to say, think from the enemy's point of view. As is reasonably evident, the synergistic application of force across multiple domains needs a very good organization and network to thrive. Never can the various manifestations of hybrid threats succeed in isolation from each other. As an example, the whole world is aware that the terrorist training camps in Pakistan or Pakistan-occupied Kashmir are being run by their government agencies that also plan disruptions in India in other forms. Undeniably, almost all trouble in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, is state-sponsored. This synergy between centrally controlled agencies is important to understand because only then can we address the challenges of hybrid conflict in the 21st century. Conduct of hybrid warfare also faces some vulnerabilities which can be exploited. First, decentralization of command structures makes it hard to achieve and exploit its successes. The instigators constantly risk losing control of the choreographed plan. Second, and more importantly, hybrid warfare as a concept runs into serious trouble while defining as to when would the aims of hybrid warfare be achieved. What does winning mean and what would be the desired end state? In other words, owing to its internal inconsistency, the concept of hybrid warfare seems difficult to operationalize into a coherent line of effort for purposeful gains. The effectiveness of a strategy that leaves no room for defining its own parameters of success in time, space, and end state is thus doubtful. States practicing this often fall victims to these tactics internally. Also, each of these hybrid warfares are contextually different. It is important to set the context because a counter strategy is always context dependent. The presumption that any set mode of warfare or doctrinal approach will lead to military victory, irrespective of the circumstances, neglects the fact that the success of a strategy is always context dependent. Our tools may not fit another threat and vice versa. There is no denying the fact that any hybrid threat needs some support by local, social, and ethnic context. However, there is no doubt that in the Indian context, it can only thrive by the designs of our Western neighbor who perpetrates terror in India and has a rich experience in the use of irregulars. A little while ago, I said that India has been subjected to this challenge since our independence. Pakistan has used irregulars repeatedly since 1948, when irregulars reinforced by the army captured some border areas of Jammu and Kashmir. Irregulars were also launched in 1965 by Pakistan before the main offensive, and in more recent memory, the Kargil misadventure was also an example of hybrid warfare. Fine calibration of terror activities adapted to the local context and supported by regular forces, which can remain non-attributable, has been Pakistan's modus operandi against India for a very long time. Through the combination of modes of action, our adversaries aim to accentuate our capabilities during troubled peace while lowering their accountability. In our context, the militaries of our neighbors enjoy primacy in their internal affairs. This makes them use all governmental agencies in coordination against us when they feel like. Therefore, this form of warfare is likely to endure. Remaining just below the conventional threshold, our neighbors may try to innovate their designs in future to foment trouble in India and disrupt a path of peaceful progress. This type of coercion is therefore here to stay. The question which arises is what should be our ideal response to an adversary which is erratic, aggressive, and possesses a terror mentality throughout the state machinery. Before I put forth my views on how to overcome this challenge in contemporary terms, I wish to compliment the heartening resolve being displayed by our officers and men in combating the proxy war being orchestrated by our adversary in Jammu and Kashmir. The professionalism in our pursuits is reflective of the collective efforts of all government agencies operating in the valley. The synergy between all elements of national power is essential to defeat the hybrid war, and I am quite sure the media persons present here would be very happy with the elimination of Jatt, who was the main person behind the killing of Sujat Bukhari, one of their friendly media persons. This form of warfare is difficult to deter with conventional means alone. Therefore, force profiling for future must have the requisite balance and dynamism to transition from one mode of conflict to another. Though cliched, this one size has to fit all. In case it is decided to focus on the one factor more than the others, the adversary would be quick to learn the kink and change the playing field again to capitalize on asymmetry. Supremacy in one front or the mode of warfare cannot be at the cost of the other. It is not an either or situation, but sadly an and situation wherein preparation to manage the spectrum of conflict has to be complete. Like I said, our enemies are employing hybrid warfare against us to their advantage. These nations continue to exploit and incite the people by spreading propaganda and violence coupled with mainstream military backing. Cross-border firings are also very common. We have two options with us. One is to engage in offensive hybrid warfare as a nation, and the second is to defend against this threat proactively. In weighing these options, our standing in the global strategic framework, our reputation, our nation's sensibilities, and training and organization of our agencies need to be looked at comprehensively. In as far as the offensive option is concerned, some of us may opine that activation of offensive hybrid warfare will force our enemies to look inwards. In the long term, offensive hybrid warfare will create standoffs in the sub-conventional conflict itself by attacking the internal dynamics, conflicts and fault lines without us having to jump to the conventional spectrum, and this would not invoke the pressures of large-scale wars. However, as a nation, we have never been expansionist. We also believe in fairness. India strongly believes in living in peace and harmony with its neighbors. The well-being and development of its people through sustained economic growth remains our continued focus and our core national interest. Thus, creating unrest in our neighbor's country should not be our first choice. Moreover, as evidenced in Pakistan, there are no good or bad terrorists. Sooner or later, such use of irregulars, such as sooner or later, such use of irregulars as a strategy destabilizes the country internally. Also, it takes the focus away from development. Thus, in my opinion, in our case, we should prefer the proactive defense option against hybrid warfare. This will involve whole of the government approach. Currently, agitational dynamics in Jammu and Kashmir triggered by nefarious elements in the form of violent protests interfere significantly in the operations of security forces. Radicalization efforts and proliferation of social media, targeted killings of civilians, political leaders, and security forces personnel by terrorists are challenges which need to be addressed at the earliest. This mandates a new integrated response strategy which is focused on governmental outreach, political dialogue, good governance, situational awareness, domination, and of course, intelligence-based operations. Militarily, this starts with the broad domain called intelligence that encompasses space, cyber, electronic, and human vectors. In order for it to be effective, it must be multimodal and therefore requires adequate resourcing. The Indian Army endeavors to separate few anti-national elements from the local populace and target terrorists while keeping the local populace sentiments and perceptions in mind. I am sure that our extensive experience in counter-terrorism will stand us in good stead in this endeavor of ours. So, the question is, how do we address the perception mosaic? In recent times, the tolerance levels of the public in Kashmir have reduced, and perceived alienation is indicative of a definitive aspirational deficit amongst the local youth. The Kashmiri youth is being indoctrinated to act irrationally. Proliferation of social media has further compounded the challenge and contributes toward the spread of an anti-establishment narrative. Perceptions in Jammu and Kashmir vary based on whose story you are listening to, thus making each narrative very different from the other. These narratives are built around the constructs of radicalization, alienation, agitation, religious fundamentalism, and anti-nationalism on one hand, and the perception of a Kashmiri common man on the other. Like I have said, this merits a coordinated approach and response. I advocate 3 lines of action. Firstly, work together. This implies to inter-agency cooperation within India and working with our international friends to blunt the hybrid advantage of the terrorist states. Secondly, we must effectively communicate the right narrative to our people. And thirdly, we must be able to harness technology and make use of it optimally. This would require both offensive and defensive technology options, especially in the cyber domain. Coming to the first part, that is working together. All government agencies are working in synergy. Diplomatically, given India's soft power, we can utilize a strategy for non-violence components to isolate Pakistan internationally. Already, the world is seeing the truth behind the failed state, which encourages terrorists on its soil. Economically, we should not shy away from projects which are beneficial to our economic progress. One example which comes to mind is to use our own share of Indus water as legally available to us under the treaty. Political dialogue and governance also need a push. As far as Indian Army goes, we continue to share our core expertise, experience and training facilities to augment the capabilities of the Central Armed Police Forces. We are training Central Armed Police Forces personnel in counter-terrorism operations. Selected CAPF and state police battalions undergo pre-induction training prior to deployment in disturbed areas. It also entails improved explosive device training and attachment of CAPF personnel with infantry battalions. So far, we have successfully trained a very large number of CAPF officers and personnel to undertake counter-insurgency and counter-terrorism operations. We will continue working with all agencies which work for peace in our country. Infiltrating the minds of youth and the civil society, whatever little of this exists in Pakistan, with what India represents vis-à-vis Pakistan, would go a long way in securing the desired geopolitical objectives. Psychological munitions are difficult to counter instantaneously and thus require advanced preparation and constant updation. Our narrative is superior. What can be better than a vibrant democracy for a human mind and human aspirations to thrive upon? This narrative needs to be propagated better. In the future scenario, cyber domain will emerge as the real battleground. Some of the tech-savvy and more sophisticated belligerents are using this already with great elan. Belligerents could jam important industrial infrastructure of opponents temporarily. As this audience may be well aware, this has been done in the past. India has advanced capabilities in the field of space technology and GPS systems in South Asia, which can be used to liquidate a recalcitrant adversary in the cyber domain. We are close to establishing the Defense Space Agency and the Defense Cyber Agency. This would deepen our integration and synergy with the other governmental agencies. And finally, before closing, I would like to share some thoughts on the way ahead. Modern hybrid warfare that simultaneously combines conventional, irregular, and terrorist components is a complex challenge that requires an adaptable and versatile military to overcome. Thus, our response and strategy needs to be congruent to the complex and changing dynamics of warfare. There is a need for highlighting the correct narrative and strongly negating the false propaganda being propagated by the separatists. Army has always been acting professionally in providing a sense of security to the population while operating within the laid down rules of engagement. However, adequate measures need to be enforced to control the agitators. The army is there for the people of Kashmir. We are separating the few select anti-national elements from the Kashmiri people and dealing with them as per laid down procedures. At the same time, the army is alive to its responsibilities and continues to keep in mind local sentiments during the conduct of all our operations. Aspirations of the youth in Kashmir have changed, and the same need to be considered in our response strategies. There is obviously a need for greater positive engagement with the youth to motivate them to remain off the streets. Our strategy needs to address issues at systematic level and at the behavioral level, both individual and collectively, and take into account aspirations of the youth in psychological, social, and in economic domains. There is need to positively engage educated and tech-savvy youth and channelize them away from the fascination of stone pelting and the gun culture. We need to harness the youth through economic development and increased employment opportunities. To be able to effectively counter the perceived alienation of the population, there is a need to create a stronger counter narrative as part of the comprehensive long-term strategic vision. All efforts should therefore be focused towards achieving this vision. Army has been carrying out perception management operations as part of Operation Sadbhavna in Jammu and Kashmir for the last 2.5 decades. But the actions of all agencies operating in the state need to be integrated towards achieving our strategic vision. A sustained, concerted, and coordinated effort with all stakeholders synergized towards the greater good of the nation is required. The battle is for the minds of the people of Kashmir. This important endeavor needs to be proactive, steady, and consistent in order to achieve the desired outcomes. Lastly, I must emphasize that a concerted effort towards a synergized response is essential. Each act of cowardice by our enemies will be rebuked and rebutted with more vigor than imaginable. No soldier's sacrifice will go in vain. Each and every uniformed person is committed to this integrated response, and that is the way for addressing hybrid warfare against our nation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and Jai Hind.